AncestryDNA is one of the leading DNA testing companies that has added DNA science to our genealogy toolkit. And if you've tested, your DNA results have become one of those really important records that you're using to build your family tree. But of course, the interesting thing I think about these records is that they're quite different from other types, which is they also evolve and they change. Now, the results themselves aren't changing, but of course our interpretation and the information that we're able to glean from them, that is evolving and continues to do so as, of course, more people get tested. So here to give us insight into the latest innovations over at AncestryDNA is the corporate genealogist for Ancestry, better known as the barefoot genealogist, Crista Cowan. Welcome to the show, Crista.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you.
Hey, happy to have you here. And DNA is always a popular topic, and you guys are always doing new things. But of course, at first, I have to ask, I'll bet you got a mug.
I do.
Yeah?
As a matter of fact.
An Ancestry mug.
I've got some. What have I got going on? It is an Ancestry mug.
Of course. Of course.
A little bit of lavender and peppermint going on.
Love it. Love it. I'm on my decaf coffee, which is, straight up. We're doing this in the afternoon. So that's my go-to in the afternoon. But wonderful to have you here. And we always love to get together and chat about genealogy here at Elevenses. And DNA, I think, is always on people's minds. And I know that one of the really common questions that I get a lot is around ethnicity and about changes and things that happen. And sometimes people, they see them and they're really excited about, they're going to launch out a new update and then things look different and it's a big surprise. Tell us a little bit about how often these updates happen, what causes them, and kind of what are we seeing here and why is it changing?
Yeah, I'd love to share that. So in order to answer that question, you kind of have to back up a little bit and understand the concept of reference panels. So when AncestryDNA started in 2012, we, of course, hadn't sold any DNA kits yet, but we had purchased scientific reference panels from others who'd been studying DNA for about a decade at that point in order to create this group of people with deep roots in a particular place in the world that we could compare customer DNA to. So as a customer takes their DNA test, the first process we run it through for this ethnicity estimate is we compare them to this reference panel. Well, as our research team has expanded their reach, and then now we have 20 million people who've taken the AncestryDNA test, and we've been able to identify candidates in our customer pool who are eligible to be part of that reference panel. That reference panel grows. And so just statistically, as it grows, those results are going to get more refined. They're going to change a little bit. And then as the science advances, we also learn new ways to compare the data so that it's more accurate. So Ancestry has been releasing an ethnicity update about once a year, usually in the fall. And it's just because we keep growing that reference panel and because of the advances in science about how those algorithms work.
So you get a lot of new people, obviously, on a regular basis who are testing. So they're adding to it. You started with that initial reference panel. You got somewhere else. Do you ever bring in other ones that become available to you to kind of speed up the process of its growth?
Yeah, we do. We've purchased a few different reference panels from research groups, but primarily the growth now is coming not just from our own customer base, but also our team of genetic scientists are looking for individuals in places around the world that are underrepresented in our reference panel in order to increase the sample size there.
Excellent. So sometimes the updates, they come out and people look at it and they go, that looks different, and now it's saying this and not that. And tell us a little bit about that, because there's some rhyme and reason behind why that happens.
There is. So there's actually two challenges that our science team faces. One has to do with place, and one has to do with time. So what we may know of as a place right now likely didn't exist 300, 500, 1,000 years ago. The boundaries have changed. The people that have migrated in and out of that place have changed. And so we have to, one of our challenges is to label those ethnicity estimate locations something that people will recognize and be able to associate with, but fully recognizing that 1,000 years ago, that place may have had people there who were called something very different. And so then the second challenge we have is that time-based challenge.
Yes.
We use this reference panel of living people, but what we estimate is with this data, we're showing you where your DNA came from 500 to 1,000 years ago. And most of us don't have trees that go back that far.
Right. Exactly. So how do you zero in on that? How do people make sense of when they see it, that they understand the context of the time frame?
Yeah, so we try to provide a lot of contextual data, and a lot of people don't even realize it's there. So when you're looking at your ethnicity estimate, you can click on any one of those, and there's usually 2 or even 3 drill down screens that give you some of that historical background and some of that information about the time period that we're covering and what the names of some of the people who lived there were. So for example, Scotland was a big one in this last update. A lot of people ended up with Scotland as an ethnicity, but really what we're looking at is who were the Britons, who were the Celts, who were the Gauls, and how do all those people so many hundreds of years ago, how did they migrate in and out of those places, and what would that admixture look like, so that we can tell you. But if we said, oh, you're Celt or Gaul or Briton even, some people wouldn't understand what that meant. So we label it Scotland, and then we expect people to drill down into that other information that we've provided by clicking through.
Do you find that people fully utilize this site? I'm thinking about, they go to so much trouble and expense to get tested. And I imagine you see a lot of back-end data. What kind of usage? And I think I've seen some recent updates that you guys have been doing to kind of help prompt people to get more involved and drill down.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that we've done is we have a mobile app. Mm-hmm. And what we're discovering is that a lot of people, their entry point, both to family history and through DNA, is through mobile. Yes. And so we've made some of the mobile prompts a little bit more prominent and a little bit easier to navigate. And then, of course, we're learning some of that and applying it to the desktop version. So we are seeing some of that. Another thing that we have that is... it wasn't introduced when AncestryDNA was first introduced. It took several years, is what we call our genetic communities. And that helps to give some additional context to some of those ethnicities as well.
I'd love to have you talk more about the communities. I think it's fascinating to see them and to see their evolution. How they've really moved along quite quickly, haven't they? For just knowing that there are many
Absolutely.
people who maybe have never looked at this. Tell us what they're missing and how to take advantage of it.
Yeah, so that first algorithm that we run against your DNA is comparing your DNA to that reference panel of people to give you those ethnicity estimates. Those are the ones with the percentages. Has a little solid colored circle, and there's always going to be a percentage next to it. But the communities are a total evolution based on who's testing and the family trees that are available. So Ancestry has 20 million people who've taken the DNA test, 100 million family trees on our site. And here's kind of how this works. As you test, you're matched to other people who have taken the test. And I think the average AncestryDNA test taker has something like 75,000 matches.
Wow.
And so there's these, right? It's kind of mind-blowing. But the idea is that the data underneath all of that means that we're able to really clearly see networks of matches. So even if we didn't know anything about your family tree or anything about your ethnicity, just based on the matching data alone, we start to see these clusters or networks of people who all match each other. And so then, because we have this rich family tree data, we can go into that network of matches, of thousands of matches, and we can say, what do they all have in common? And what we start to see is the data very clearly points to specific birth locations within their tree within the last 200 years. So your ethnicity estimate is looking 1,000 years ago, but those communities are where members of your family have lived within the last 200 years. And we've now got more than 1,500 of those around the world.
That's amazing. And of course, if the person's in the tree, they have time frame associated with them as well, not just place, which is so cool because, like you said, it's just lurching the whole thing closer, in time to us, which is really exciting.
Right? Yeah. And if you start to think about that time piece, right? So we're looking at tree data 100 to 200 years ago because of this network effect. But what's possible is as the network continues to grow and as the science continues to get better, we may not only be able to connect you to specific genetic communities, but also show you migration paths from your original ethnic origins over time, which then allows people to have an entire complete family history story without ever starting a family tree themselves. Hopefully that then leads them into it because they want to know, well, which branch of my family tree does this represent?
Give us a sense. You were talking about some people don't have trees. Of course, that's just the bane of every genealogist, right? They go and they look and they go, this person doesn't have a tree and they're my best match. But what kind of percentage I know you get a lot of people who test, maybe they saw the commercial on TV and they go, that looks really cool, I'm going to do that. But they were not doing genealogy. How does that break down?
Yeah, so, it's so funny that you say that because anytime anybody complains about matches not having trees, I always send them to your Roots Tech presentation that you did with Diane about, no tree, no problem.
Yeah. How many of you have a DNA match that doesn't have a tree? Yeah. This is a big problem. It's a problem.
Because the reality is, like, you can figure out a lot from a match even if they don't have a family tree. But yeah, there are probably about half of my matches anyway do not have any tree at all. And we see that that's pretty consistent across the board, which means those are most likely people who this is their first foray into family history. I actually was just on a call this morning with a woman who took the DNA test about 4 years ago, had no idea there even was a match list. Like, didn't know there was a match list, didn't think she could build a tree because she thought she needed a subscription. So she just took the test to get the ethnicity estimate and somehow ignored all the emails Ancestry sent her to tell her to check out her new matches or start a tree. but once she was contacted by a match. So one of the best things you can do for those matches who don't have trees is send them messages. She got this message from one of her close matches. It piqued her curiosity. She's like, how does this person know who I am? She discovered the match list. She started a tree. And she's now had this whole 4-year family history journey where she's figured out who her biological father is and has met aunts and uncles and a half sibling. And yeah, and so for those of us who have trees and who are involved in family history, recognize that those people taking a DNA test, that's their first step in the door. And it's up to us, I think, sometimes to nurture them through that door by engaging with them through messaging or sharing information that we might have discovered in a non-threatening way, hopefully.
So they're testing and they're thinking, I'm going to find out what my ethnicity is, and not even realizing that there's this whole matching thing going on. Do you find that a lot of those kinds of folks, do they eventually get bit by the bug? Do they get like us and start, going and looking? And I'd love to have you asking this question, but I wanted to really also have you reemphasize, you don't have to have a subscription to add the tree. And I think you're absolutely right. Tons of people don't realize that.
Yeah, if you've taken a DNA test and that's the only thing you've paid for, you haven't paid for an Ancestry subscription to access the 80 billion records on the site, then you can still start a family tree. That's a free service on Ancestry for anybody who has a free registered guest account, or anybody who used to have a subscription and canceled it at some point. You can still work on your family tree. And yeah, that's something that a lot of people don't realize. You can also, and this is something else people don't realize, respond to messages from other users. The Message Center is a free service, and you can send messages. You can initiate contact with any of your DNA matches without a subscription as well.
Fantastic. So you're really getting to take full advantage of the whole DNA thing, even if you aren't currently doing the subscription and doing the genealogical records and all of that. Wow. I was watching your video recently. I guess it was the June update, and you were talking about how you got to see some of that back-end data and saw that people weren't really interacting. And I love these buttons and these abilities to add, this is a son, this is a nephew, whatever. tell people a little bit about that, and how is that going? Is the rollout done yet, and are you seeing some great response?
Yeah, so we do continue to make innovations to the match list and how people interact with it. Of course, 2 years ago at Roots Tech, we introduced the custom groups with the 24 different colors, and it was innovative for those of us who were deep into family history. We had this hypothesis, though, that new users would find that fun and interactive as well. And unfortunately, new users, especially those who'd never considered family history before, didn't have the mental construct around a pedigree chart or sides of the family. Right. So they didn't even have any idea how to group their matches. And so it had really low usage. The usage it had was among really hardcore genealogists and people into genetic genealogy. So we've been doing a lot of testing over the last year trying to figure out how to solve the problem of new users coming to the match list and looking at it and going, that's great, now what?
Right.
Right. We wanted to give them something actionable to do. So now, and this has been released, it's been rolled out to all users, I think as of last week. Every match has a little button on it that just says, do you know this person? Yes, and if you don't, you can click Learn More to find out more about that experience. But as soon as you click yes, it then asks you to assign a side of your family. So you can say, oh yes, I know this person, they're on my mother's side. And then once you do that, it asks you if you know the specific relationship. And here's another little nuance that we're helping train people into in both interaction, but also what family history really means. We give them a list of the possible relationships based on how much DNA they share. So one of the things that DNA sometimes uncovers is surprises. Mm-hmm. And you might think this person is your full sibling, but the DNA says otherwise. Or you might think, whatever the relationship might be. So we give you those options to assign that relationship. And then that fills another customer request, which is when you select the relationship, it updates from a predicted relationship on that match, which is usually a range of cousinship, to what the specific relationship is based on your assignment.
I love it. I mean, you guys are in the driver's seat in terms of knowing and understand the technology. It's so wonderful that you're helping to guide people to get more out of it, and to get on board quicker. I have to ask you this question because I imagine you have gotten this question, and I'd love to know how you answer it. How accurate are the ancestry testing, the DNA test results? I heard somebody ask that at a conference once, and I almost wanted to sit by and listen and see what the person said. What do you tell people when they ask you that?
It's such an interesting question because accuracy can be measured in a number of ways, and we need to know what you're talking about when you say accuracy. So when you ask, is this person on the top of my match list listed as my parent or child, how accurate is that? It's like 100% accurate that is how much DNA you share with this person, and that is either the nature of the relationship or you've got a parent with an identical twin. Right? So accuracy in that case, super confident. When you ask about accuracy of ethnicity results, we call it an estimate for a reason. And one of the things you'll discover when you click through to view it is that there's actually a range. That top level percentage you're seeing is an average of 1,000 different times that the algorithm has been run against your DNA and that reference panel, because just the nature of the way that those results are analyzed and compared to that reference panel means there's going to be some swing around an average. And again, we release those updates every year because, again, as the reference panel grows, there's more refinement possible.
Yes, exactly. Good answer. I like that answer. What are some of the most common questions that you get about DNA? I imagine there might be some folks watching who are going, yes, that's what I was wondering. What do you hear?
I will tell you what our number one question is, and I bet a lot of your viewers have the same question, and a lot of people at conferences have the same question. We see it on social media all of the time. It is, where is my Native American DNA?
They still want the princess they're looking for or whatever. Oh, goodness sakes.
Yeah. It's amazing to me how prevalent and pervasive that narrative is in so many families. And they take a DNA test with full confidence that it's going to tell them that they're 17 or 12 or 8% Indigenous North American, when the reality is, if they do have a Native American ancestor, it is most likely that person lived 300 or 400 years ago, and that they just didn't inherit those bits of DNA. Because, of course, the inheritance of DNA is random, and a lot of new people into family history haven't really wrapped their brains around what that means yet. They think they get half of everything and haven't done the math to calculate what that means. Or they were told that a parent or grandparent was a full native. I grew up with that narrative in my family. My grandfather boasted of the fact that he was a quarter Native American. He was born in Indian territory. I think that's probably partially where that started from. And, you know, everybody claims the features, but the reality is he was not. There is no evidence of that in the family tree once the research has been dug into. But I still have cousins taking DNA tests and fully expecting it to show up and kind of freaking out when it doesn't. So.
Well, that brings up the
number one question we get.
I am not surprised. Yes. I'm wondering, is the Native American a large reference panel? Is that well represented?
So it was not in the beginning, but we have been collecting additional samples. So it used to be back in 2012 when we started doing DNA testing, if you had Native American DNA, we would just tell you Native American, and that was all of the Americas, North, Central, and South. We now have, I think, 9 different regions of Indigenous American, so we can split it out across the 2 continents. And now we're starting to see some communities around some of those as well. So the reference panel is growing and the number of testers are growing as well. So here's what I tell people, and they don't always like this answer, but if you have Native American DNA, it will show up on an AncestryDNA test.
Right. And you made such an important point, but you could have a Native American ancestor and not have Native American DNA or any other type of segment, I guess, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It just depends on how many ancestors have Native American DNA and how far back they were, whether or not you actually inherited those bits.
Give people a sense of how many generations back does it become minute in terms of what you might be inheriting from somebody? Yeah.
So I am not a math person.
Me either.
That's
why I'm asking you.
I know math and science. But DNA has changed my world, and it amuses my accountant father to no end that I can do this now in my head.
Wow.
Right. So everybody inherits exactly 50% of DNA from their parents. Those parents inherited 50% of DNA from each of their parents, but what they pass down to you is going to be about 25% of your grandparents' DNA. And then it just gets cut in half every generation back. So you're going to have about 12.5% of your great-grandparents' DNA, and about 6% of your two greats, and about 3% of your 3 greats, and about 1.5% of your 4 greats. And by the time you get to your 5th great-grandparents, it is possible, when you consider all of the people in that generation, that you did not inherit any DNA from one of them, because you got all of it from one of the others. So 5 generation, 5 times great-grandparents is the generation where we start to see some of that fall off. But that means that you're getting it from somewhere. So some of those lines of your family tree will go back to the 7th and 8th and sometimes even 9th great-grandparents.
Well, and that makes the case why when it's focus on best matches, right? You were talking about some people might have 75,000 matches, but you got to start with and really identify who the closest were and work on these, because they probably have the most potential to give you information, right?
Well, not only the most potential to give you information, but also to build a solid foundation so that you can explore those more distant matches. Because unless you've built that solid foundation and validated the relationships all the way back to 3rd or 4th or 5th great-grandparents, the hope of connecting with a 8th or 9th cousin on one of those other lines further back is going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more shaky of a conclusion.
Yeah. You know, when people get a best match, they want to reach out. And you were talking about the messaging system is free. It's part of what you have access to when you test. I'd love you're on the phone. You talk to people. I've seen you at the conferences. You know, you're talking firsthand to your customers and really hearing from them. What kind of coaching do you give people on how to approach somebody, or even more so, if they get resistance? is there one more thing they might be able to say just to kind of keep the door open or somehow nudge somebody? What do you recommend?
Okay, so Lisa, I am single. I have never been married, and that might seem like a funny segue into
I'm wondering where you're going with that.
That means I have a whole, I know, right? That means I have a whole lot of experience dating.
Yeah.
That's what that means. And I approach communicating with unknown or unpreviously connected to cousins a little bit like I approach dating. Like, you're not going to spill all of your deepest, darkest secrets on the first date, or you're going to send them screaming into the night, right? Or they may just like entirely ghost you, right? That's the new term for people who just ignore you after a date. And that happens sometimes. People just go on for paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs in that initial message they send a cousin. And my guess is those cousins are seeing some of those messages and just being like, I don't even know what to do with this information. It's overwhelming.
Right.
So you have to tone it down. But by the same token, right, I'm not going to go on a first date and just sit there and not answer his questions or not try to initiate a conversation. And so, again, similarly, when you send out that first message, you're going to want to provide enough information that that's something they can respond to. So I've seen people send messages that say something like, hi, we're DNA matches. Do you know how we're related?
And put it all on them.
And they give them nothing to work with. Right? So you have to give them just enough that they will want to respond and that they have something to respond to, but not so much that you overwhelm
And
them.
maybe something just a little intriguing. You know, I know that when I've talked to people who we are sharing ancestors on a family tree, you know, one of the things I'll say is, you know, I have some photos. You know, I'd love to talk to you about that. Maybe you do too. Versus, I remember in the old days, oh, I just lost my earphone. In the old days, I would send them. Oh, I'd think, oh, I'm going to get them all interested. I'm going to send them my best pictures. They take them and they never respond, you know? So it's like, you don't want to give away the kitchen sink, right? That's what you're saying, I think. And it's a good strategy. It's a good strategy. Yeah. And I know sometimes too, also back then, I would get a message from somebody and they sounded so like a PhD scientist. I felt intimidated. I'm like, I can't keep it. I'm going to say something and I'll be wrong. You know, they'll be able to say, oh my gosh, you don't know what you're talking about. So, I mean, there's also that intimidation factor. I guess we don't want to, even if we do know all that stuff, we don't want to necessarily wipe people out with it. I like those strategies.
Right. Yeah. You want to just keep it. I used to have a saying about intriguing, but not overwhelming.
Yes,
That's kind of the mantra
that
runs through my head when I craft those messages.
I like that. Anything else when it comes to Ancestry DNA that we should be keeping our eyes out for? Anything you want to tell us about what's coming in the future? What do you got?
Yeah, so there's a few things, and most of them, we can kind of divide it into two categories around the ethnicity estimates in the communities. So the way, just to make sure this is clear, we update ethnicities about once a year in the fall. So watch for that. We usually send out an email or put a banner on the site, but one of the things that we've learned is that a lot of people don't know that, and so they don't know to come check and see what's been updated. So just watch for those announcements or those emails. But genetic communities can be updated at any time for two reasons. One is you may all of a sudden just have enough matches that you're pulled into an existing network that has been labeled as an existing community. So those communities could just pop up at any time. And then the other is about every 6 or 8 weeks or so, we're releasing new communities. Our science team has been working fast and furious to identify new network clusters and make sure that we've got them labeled correctly and that we've worked with history professors and others to understand the cultural and historical implications, because we want to be accurate and informative, but also sensitive to all the nuances around race and ethnicity and history, because history is messy. And as people dive into it, you know, those of us who've been doing family history understand that. But again, a lot of people new to family history, and DNA is their first foot in the door. And we want to make sure that we're a little sensitive to how we present some of that information. So so always new communities. And so that's on that DNA story side of the house. And then we are working on some additional features for the DNA match list. We've previewed them with some customer experience groups. We've previewed them with influencer groups like yourself. And so just we can say that those are coming, but can't talk a whole lot about them. But we're listening to our customers, and we're really trying to make sure that DNA match list experience works for casual customers just taking their first steps into family history, and those of us who are hardcore into this and trying to break through 40-year brick walls using our DNA results.
Well, and you said you listen to your customers, and I know you guys do. What is the best way for somebody to get in touch with you or just share feedback or a question?
Yeah, there's two primary channels for that, though we listen in a lot of ways. But Ancestry has a Facebook page. So if you go to the official Ancestry Facebook page, you can send a direct message to us with your feedback or post it just there on the wall. Our product managers do follow that and keep track and put that into our feedback system. And then the other one is if you just do a Google search for Ancestry feedback, it'll bring up a feedback form that's in our help center. It's a little easier to find it that way sometimes. That'll bring up a feedback form.
I think I was just talking on my show about the fact that somebody was saying, well, how do I get help? And I was like, sometimes Googling it for the Ancestry help. Ancestry's website is so well organized, it will grab exactly whatever page you're looking for, probably even faster than navigating. Well, how fun to get a chance to catch up with you on the latest with AncestryDNA. Now, we recently followed each other over at Instagram, and I see that we share another passion, which is gardening. Have you been into gardening these days, this summer?
I always had aspirations, but with all of the genealogical conferences and the traveling that I do for Ancestry, my summers, I've never been home until this last summer. And so last summer I tried it, and I failed miserably. I grew one tomato and a little bit of basil. That was what I did. But I'm in it again.
Right?
Yes. This year I've got some zucchini going and a little herb garden, and we're trying tomatoes again. We'll see how that goes. So.
Good job. Are you planting in the ground or are you doing containers?
Both. So I have a little garden patch in my backyard, but then I also built some standing garden racks for my herbs and stuff.
Very cool. I've been in the same boat as you. It's like after 14 years of constant traveling, which has been great. I've missed it, but I started all these container gardening. I'm doing the self-wicking tubs. I saw a guy on YouTube doing it. It looked awesome. So we'll see how it pans out here in the heat of Texas. But anyway, there's always never enough time to do all the wonderful things that we would enjoy doing. And certainly genealogy is that way. But it's exciting to hear about the new stuff that you guys continue to roll out. And I think one of the real takeaways here is get back in there and check fairly regularly your communities. You might see something new, right? Well, again, thank you so much, Crista Cowan. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you or your website, blog, Instagram, where should they go check you out?
Yeah, the best place is on Instagram, and it's just my Instagram handle is just my name, Crista Cowan. That's C-R-No-H, I-S-T-A-C-O-W-A-N.
Wonderful. So fun to talk to you. I hope next time we'll get to do it in person.
Absolutely.